Hey guys, we're going to do some notes today on taxes. Since I've got a track meet this afternoon, I can't do the notes in person, so I'm going to do a recording of them. That way you can go at your own pace. If you are my sixth or seventh period, you better be well behaved while I'm out. Okay? All right, so taxes. Taxes are something that are used by the government to fund most of the things that the government does. They also can use inflation to fund things, and they can also use debt. But the problem with using debt is at some point you have to pay that debt. So you either go into more debt, raise taxes, or inflation. So uh, debt isn't really a way of actually paying for things long term. It's more of a short term solution. All right. So sales taxes. It's the most common tax you see. You've probably paid sales tax yourself many times. I went to, oops, sorry. I went to a gas station and got an oatmeal cream pie and a Giant Mountain Dew for breakfast. Breakfast of Champions there, and I had to pay sales tax. Now, in Hoover, a soda that's 99 cents, which it's hard to find anything that cheap anymore, would be taxed 8.5 cents or 9.5 cents, depending on if you're in Jefferson County or Shelby County. So there'll be county sales taxes, there'll be city sales taxes, um, and those can vary. And you notice I said half a cent. Well, that doesn't really uh, impact smaller purchases. But if you buy something for $1,000, half a cent, that's actually real money, and that money adds up. Sales tax. You buy soda for 99 cents, you pay $1.07 or $1.08. That's not a big deal, but people do that all day, all year, over and over again, and that starts to add up. Sales taxes pay for things like schools, um, but they're considered regressive, meaning there's two types of taxes in terms of the way to look at it. Well, three really, but there's progressive taxes, meaning the wealthier you are, the more you pay, and then you also have regressive taxes, which would be just if we said everybody has to pay $100 in taxes a year, that would be considered regressive because if you're poor, $100 is going to matter a lot more to you than if you're a millionaire. So the idea is that if the richer you are, the more you pay. That would be considered a progressive tax. Now, in many countries, they don't have sales taxes the way we do. They might have a VAT tax, value added tax, or a tax that's actually in the price, meaning if it says it's a dollar, when you go to the register, it's a dollar. Okay. Um, they don't add the tax separately. In America, most of the time when you buy something, they tell you the price and then you buy it and then they say, oh, plus taxes. Same thing for a car. If the car says it's $25,000, that probably wouldn't include tax and other stuff. One exception would be gas. Gas has a tax to it, but it's a different type of tax. So if it says gas is $1.90, well, it shouldn't say dollar anything. If gas is $3, for example. You don't pump it and then it says, "Ooh, here's an extra tax." The tax there is a little separate. But sales taxes is very common. It raises a lot of money locally, but not as much as some other types of taxes. All right. Next are property taxes. Those are taxes you pay on the land and property that you own. Okay. It gets more expensive the more you develop the land. For example, if you own land worth $100,000, you'd pay 0.656 or $656 per year in property taxes. Okay. And so property taxes also pay for schools, depending on where you're at. Some places use more sales taxes than property taxes. Some places use more property taxes than sales taxes. Um, and even if you live in an apartment, you still indirectly pay property taxes. Let's say you have 5 acres of land that's worth, we'll say $100,000. Okay, you'd only pay $656 in property taxes. Now, let's say you clear cut all that land and then you turn it into an apartment complex with 100 apartment units, and all those units together are worth $5 million. Well, you've increased the value 50 times, which means your property taxes would go up 50 times. So even though it's the same land area, the value has gone up. Um, Now you would have to owe that money every year. Well, how would you pay it? Well, when you rent out the apartment, part of the rent would be what would cover your property taxes. So if your rent's $1,000 a month in an apartment, you are paying the property taxes on that property. You're not going to see it on there. It's not going to be listed as part of your rent. That's one of the advantages of rent, is that you don't have to fool with that stuff. Okay. If you live in an apartment and it burns down, or it gets struck by lightning, or floods, or whatever happens there, you don't have to pay for that structure. Now you won't have to pay for your personal items. That's why you can get what's called renter's insurance, but you don't have to worry about the building itself. If the walls are caved in or something from a meteorite hitting, you don't have to pay to fix that. That's not your problem. But you pay for the insurance through your rent. Okay. And property taxes in some places are really, really expensive. In Alabama, our property taxes are fairly low. Our sales taxes are it depends. Our sales taxes are kind of high in some things. In many states, for example, with sales tax, going back to sales taxes, in many states you don't have to pay any sales tax on grocery items, and there has been a movement for people to um, or for the legislature to pass a law not taxing groceries. Because again, groceries are something everybody needs. So the idea is we don't want to tax that, because that kind of hurts poorer people, because now they're spending more money in taxes. Um, I think there's a legit argument to be made for that. But um, the question is, are you going to cut government spending to make up for the lack of sales tax you get on groceries, or are you going to just raise taxes somewhere else? Um, but there's several states. If you go to a Publix in some states and you buy some groceries, you don't have to pay taxes on it. Okay, so that can be seen as a good thing. Okay, so property taxes is another big one. If you develop land, your property taxes will go up. All right. And what ends up happening is, and your parents can probably tell you, what happens is you have a tax assessor, and they essentially will decide what your property is worth. And so they'll look and say, okay, well, last year your property was worth $200,000. This year we say it's worth $205,000, or $210,000, or $250,000, or whatever. Or if it was just a bunch of trees and you turned it into a big old house, maybe it's worth $1 million, or whatever it's worth. Now, if you think your house isn't worth as much as they say it's worth, then you can actually protest that and say, no, my house is not worth that much money. The thing is, if you look at the tax, if your house is worth 100,000, but they valued it at $120,000, that's not going to make a huge difference in how much you pay in taxes. Um, that actually happened to my mom years ago. They said her house was worth a certain amount, and it wasn't, because it's an old rickety house. And she said, well, if I try to go protest this and say that my house is not worth this much money, I have to pay money to do that. I have to get somebody to officially come out and look at my house and make a better determination of what it's worth. Because when they assess your house, they don't walk into your house and go, ooh, you have new hardwood floors, or ooh, you have a new kitchen. It's kind of a guesstimation. And again, we're not talking huge swings of money. So if they raise your value $50,000, that's $300. Okay. Now, if you have to pay somebody to come out and do a legitimate assessment of your house, or appraisal and all that, that's probably going to cost you more than the taxes are worth. So a lot of times people don't fool with that too much. All right. So look, on the left is a big grass field. On the right is a subdivision. Okay. Big grass field going to cost a lot less than the subdivision. And part of the thing is, on the left, you're not really getting any money for that. So let's say you had a couple $100,000 sitting around and you decide to buy couple hundred acres of land out in the country somewhere. Well, you could buy that land for, 100,000 or whatever land goes for in the country. The more remote the area, the cheaper um, the land. But whatever you would buy it for, they'd say, okay, that's what it's worth, and that's how much taxes are going to be, whatever. The problem is the next year, even though you've done nothing with the property, you still have to pay property taxes every year. Okay, so it's kind of like having to pay rent on your own land that you are supposed to already own. And if you don't pay property taxes on it, you can get in trouble. If you try to sell it, they'll say you can't sell it unless you pay your property taxes off. Um, but property taxes are usually not going to be super high unless you own a lot of land. And if you own a lot of land, you probably have enough money for the taxes. But then on the right, you can see there's a bunch of houses and streets and things like that. That would cost a lot more money in property taxes, but you would also make more money. If you have a neighborhood with 100 houses in it, and you sell each house for $300,000, that's a lot of money. That's $30 million. Okay. It might cost you $25 million to build all the houses and everything, but then boom, you have $5 million extra. And so that's why a lot of people that have these subdivisions will tend to sell them, because if once they sell the house, they're not really making any more money on it. Okay, so that's property taxes. Those are the two biggest that people worry about on a local level. All right, next, we have income taxes. Income taxes are taxes on the money you earn. Now, what's considered income can be a little tricky. The income tax was illegal before the 16th Amendment was passed back in 1913. Okay, so right when Woodrow Wilson was sworn into office during the Progressive era, they did not have an income tax. Okay, the government paid for things with excise taxes and tariffs and other types of taxes. The government wasn't as big as it is today. This was before World War One, so the wars that the U.S. had fought at that point would be, Civil War, Revolutionary War, Spanish-American War, and so Mexican-American War. And so those wars were not huge, so they didn't really need to run up a lot of money. But the idea with the income tax is, hey, we will tax people's income, which was illegal under the Constitution. You could not just do that. You had to tax people equally. You couldn't tax some people more because they made more. So that's why they had to pass an amendment for it. They're done on a federal, state, and then sometimes they're done on a local level. So there's a federal income tax that applies to every state. And then the states can have their own income tax. Not every state does that. When I show you a picture in a minute, you'll see. And then some cities can do an income tax. So, Birmingham could say, if you work in Birmingham, you don't even have to live in Birmingham, but if you work there, we're going to take 1% of your income as an income tax. They could do that. All right. Most taxes are withheld, meaning the government gets the money before you ever see it. Okay. And what that means is, let's say you make $100,000 and you're supposed to pay 12% income tax. That would be $12,000. Well, the old system, when they first came up with it, taxes were much, much lower than they are now. When they first came out with income tax, you would have to write a check for your income tax. Okay? So if you owe $12,000, you would have to write a check for $12,000. People didn't like that. So this guy named Milton Friedman, who's from the pencil video you watched on Monday, and he said, well, maybe we can do withholding. And what that does is, instead of you having to pay $12,000 at the end of the year, they would just take $1,000 a month, which adds up to $12,000, from your paycheck. And so if you were supposed to make, $9,000 or whatever dollars a month, or I guess $8,000. If whatever you were supposed to make, when you see your paycheck, it's not what you earn. So if you guys get a job working at Chick-fil-A or Publix or something, or wherever in the next couple of years, and you're making $10 an hour and you work 20 hours a week, you've made $200. But when you get your paycheck, it will not say $200. It will say a lot less than that, because you're going to have to pay income taxes, among other things. Okay. And so what ends up happening is people get paid less money than they otherwise would. And then at the end of the year, when they calculate how much taxes they should have paid, sometimes they realize, you know what, the government took out too much of my paycheck. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a refund. And then people get refund checks in the springtime, and a lot of times they get excited because they're getting money back. But the problem is that's money that they gave to the government throughout the year that they shouldn't have. Um, and so they essentially gave them an interest-free loan. So if you're doing your taxes, ideally you want to do it so that you don't pay much at all. But you also don't want to get a bunch back, because that means you could have got that earlier in the year. If you get, let's say, for example, you get $1,200 back in a tax refund when you do your taxes, that means every month you gave the government $100 that you shouldn't have. And then they give it back to you at the end of the year. But if you'd had $100 a month throughout the year, that would probably be better for you than to get $1,200 at the end, because you could have done things with that at the time, or you could have invested it, or you could have done whatever. The U.S. has a progressive income tax. The more you make, the more they take. All right, so about half of all people who work in America don't pay income taxes. I know I talked about this with some classes. If you have a child, the government gives you a tax credit, meaning it's like you paid a couple thousand. If you have 3 or 4 kids, it's like, okay, we actually don't want as much money from you, because they essentially give you credit for paying taxes if you have kids or various other things. You can get tax credits for it. And so a lot of people have multiple kids that actually offsets what their taxes would be, so they don't pay any taxes at all. Okay. So here are income tax rates. This is from 2018. They're pretty similar. You'll notice 2 of the bigger states, Texas and Florida, by population, don't have an income tax. They have nothing. Okay. And you'll see the highest state is California, 13.3%. Okay. So if you are a professional basketball player or football player, and you have the option of being drafted by the team in Miami or Dallas or in Los Angeles, you will get to keep more money if you get a job. Hold on. You will keep more money if you are in Texas or Florida. Okay. The bad thing is you don't get to pick where you play when you're first drafted. So like Steph Curry, if he makes $40 million a year from the Warriors, 13% of that goes to California income tax, okay, which works out to be millions of dollars. So if he only made $35 million but played for the Dallas Mavericks, he would actually be making more. He would actually keep more money. Okay, that's why a lot of people who do individual sports like golf, a lot of them live in Florida or Texas because their income tax is lower. Tesla used to be based out of California, and then now it's in Texas. And there's lots of other businesses that have moved to Texas because their income tax isn't there. Now, does that mean Texas doesn't have any taxes? No, they have higher property taxes and sales taxes, but the income taxes aren't there. But California has super high income taxes related to anybody. The next closest one is Hawaii. But see, Alabama, theirs is only 5%. Okay, so if all other things being equal, if you made $10 million in California, then California is going to take $1.33 million in income taxes. If you live in Alabama and make $10 million, they will take not even half that much. They'll take $500,000. So you save $830,000 just based on where you live. Okay, and people respond to these incentives. What's interesting is a lot of times if you work somewhere and you don't live there, you still have to pay taxes there. There was an interesting Supreme Court case a couple years ago. It was a guy who lived I think he played for the Green Bay Packers, and I think they had a game. They played the Cleveland Browns, I believe it was, and uh, Cleveland. It could have been Cincinnati, but I know it was in Ohio. Long story short, they had a tax for people who worked in the city. Kind of like if I live outside of Birmingham City, but I work in Birmingham City, I would have to pay Birmingham City taxes on my paycheck because I work there. Well, the thing is with the NFL, NBA is you work in lots of different states. Okay, so if you're an NFL player, you might actually go to 8 other states throughout the year playing games um, that you don't live in. Well, there was a case where a guy who played for the Packers, his team had a game in Ohio, and if you work in Ohio, they say you got to pay taxes. So even if you're just playing a road game on a Sunday, you still have to pay taxes there. And what they do is they say, okay, uh, your paycheck is based on playing 16 NFL games. It's 17 now, but it used to be 16. So we're going to tax 1/16 of your income as being from Ohio, which is not a tremendous amount of money, but it's nothing. It's not nothing. Okay, and so the issue with this guy is he was hurt, so he actually didn't even take the plane to Ohio. Um, he stayed in his own house. But they said, well, you might not have played, but your team played, so we still want your money. And I'm pretty sure he ended up winning that court case. But it's a weird thing when people can be taxed in states they don't even visit. All right, here's the federal income tax rate. This is from 2018. It gets tweaked every year, but this is pretty close to what it is. So if you make $9,525 or less, you get taxed at 10%. Now, so that would be $952. Okay. Well, there's lots of ways to get tax deductions. So if you make that much, if you know what you're doing with your taxes, you probably aren't going to pay any money. For example, if you had a kid and you made $9,525, you would not pay any federal income tax. Okay, because you might owe $952.50 because that's 10% of 9,525. But if you have a kid, you get a tax credit for more than $900. So if you're making the lowest tax rate, you actually get paid more. You actually get paid money. Okay. And then if you make $9,525 or more, your tax rate goes up to 12%. And this is for single filers. Okay. If you're married, the number is pretty much double. Um, Now the way it works is they only tax you between those amounts of money. Meaning, if you make $9,525 exactly, you get paid 10%. Okay, if you make $9,525.50, now you're 12%. But they don't tax all of your money at 12%. Okay, because in that case, that extra 50 cents would mean you pay 2% more of your income. No, no, no. You only pay 12% on that extra 50 cents. Okay, and so um, you only get taxed on the money between the brackets. Now you might say this sounds confusing, and guess what? It is confusing, and that's kind of the purpose. There's lots of people called accountants that try to navigate this stuff. I know my wife and I, we pay somebody, we just take our forms in um, that we filled out, and like our employer will say, all right, here's how much money you paid in taxes. We take all those forms, and we get stuff from charity that we give them to them, whatever. They take it to the tax person and say, here's our stuff. They fill it out real quick and say, this is what you owe, this is what you get back. And we pay them, I don't know, 80 or $100 for 15 minutes of work. But we know they're going to do the tax properly, and we don't want to fool with it ourselves. So it's kind of worth it. But yeah, taxes can be really confusing. So accountants, especially accountants for like really big businesses, they make really good money because if you have a good accountant, they can save you a lot of money. All right. And you can see if you make more than half a million, your tax rate is 37%. I kind of wish I'd shown the old tax rate. The old tax rate was like the top tax rate was super low. When the income tax was created 108 years ago, the most people didn't pay taxes at all. It only applied above a certain amount, and it was really small because they weren't trying to get a lot of money from it. Now, a huge portion of the government's funding comes from income taxes. All right. Let's see. What I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to post that video about taxes, and so I can go ahead and move on to the next thing. It's a cool little video. So I'll post that in Google Classroom. So next kind of taxes are tariffs or excise, not exercise, excise taxes. That means they're indirect. Okay. A tariff, we've talked about that, a tax on imported goods. Back in the day, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, those presidents, a lot of the money that the government got in taxes were from tariffs. And the tariffs were very high because they wanted American-made goods because they didn't understand economics that great. And they thought that would make us richer. But anyway, tariffs, or taxes on imported goods, that was one way. Another one's what's called an excise tax. It's, I don't know why it says take, oh goodness. It's a tax on goods in the U.S. like fuel and alcohol. In Alabama, there's an 18-cent tax on gas from the federal government and an 18-cent tax from Alabama. So it's 36 cents. So if gas is $3.36, now they might have tweaked this. This might be a year or two old, but you get the idea. If gas is $3.36, that means it normally would be $3 even, but you're paying 36 cents in taxes. In California, the tax is 54 cents. So in California, the taxes are going to be higher, so the gas will be higher. And also, one of the reasons gas is higher in California, besides taxes, is that a lot of the land is more expensive. And so when they are coming up with how much they're going to charge for gas, they have to make sure they can afford the rent on the land that they're renting out. And so that's why taxes or gas is more expensive in California. And so in other countries, gas is even more expensive. And some of these European countries where they're not very big and people are packed tightly, not everybody has a car, so they don't have as many automobiles, and so their gas taxes. There's some places where gas is $6 a gallon all the time, and that's just because most people don't need to drive as much because they can walk places. Like in New York City, lots of people don't have cars. They can take the subway or walk. All right, so those are tariffs and excise taxes. This was kind of funny because I showed this a couple years ago because it was like when gas prices were high, and people would say that and go, "Whoa!" Now, if you see 252, you'd be like, "Wow, that's cheap. Wish we could go back to that." All right. The next big taxes that you'll end up having to pay when you get a job are called FICA, or Social Security and Medicare taxes. These are payroll taxes that fund welfare programs like Social Security and Medicare. What that means is if you're old, you can get Social Security. Once you get over a certain age, depending on how you do it, they've tweaked the age historically. But once you get into your 60s, you will eventually be able to get what's called Social Security. And that means what they do is they take money from people working and they give it to you. Okay, it's based on how much money you made, how long you worked, stuff like that. Medicare is health insurance that the government provides for older people. Okay, there's also Medicaid as well, which is health insurance for people that are below a certain income level. Okay, and so if you have a job and you see your paycheck, you'll see that the FICA taxes, Social Security, Medicare, sometimes it depends on the paycheck, we'll say different things, but those taxes come out too. It's 7.65% for people that are employed. Now, so that means if you make $10,000 in a month, 7% will be paid by you. The other 7.65% is paid for by your employer. So when you get hired, not only do they have to pay for you and give you money for income, they also have to pay taxes for you. Now, if you're self-employed, you don't work for anybody, you work for yourself, you have to pay both sides of that. So you have to pay 15%. So if you are own your own business or whatever, or do work yourself, you have to pay 15%, and that's a lot. All right. And people have talked about tweaking that because Social Security and Medicare they're paying a lot of money out, but they don't get a lot of money in taxes in because people are getting older and living longer, and so they are trying to figure out a way to still give people Social Security and Medicare. But if more and more people are not working and they're retired, then you have too much money going out and not enough money coming in, and then you have a problem. And we're starting to see that now. But nobody likes paying more in taxes, and nobody wants to have less money from Social Security and Medicare. So they're kind of at an impasse because nobody really wants to solve the problem. Um, so anyway, so those are the main types of taxes. After you finish this on the Ed Puzzle, you can go ahead and check on Google Classroom and watch the little video that they made about taxes with Donald Duck. All right. Um, if you have any questions about anything like this, just shoot me an email and I'll respond.